In a bombshell revelation that sent shockwaves through Windsor, Prince William stood before a hushed audience to disclose the late Queen Elizabeth II's final directive, a will of unprecedented consequence, referred to simply as the ATBE document. The room fell silent when he announced that Her Majesty had petitioned King Charles to revoke the royal titles of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's children, Archie and Lilibet. According to insiders, the will underscored that royal titles represent privileges earned through duty and dedication, rather than entitlements passed on regardless of scandal. As William's words echoed in the vaulted hall, eyes darted toward Harry and Meghan, who, by all accounts, were taken aback by this startling command. Why, in a family already roiled by controversy, did such an edict from the late Queen emerge now? Why was it William, rather than Charles himself, who delivered the message? And how did Harry and Meghan respond behind closed doors? Before unwrapping this turbulent story, from family loyalties to royal betrayals, those who bore witness remember a tense quiet, so dense it seemed to seep into every stone of Windsor Castle. This silence, they said, was a physical presence, a moment of stillness in which everyone sensed that something monumental was unfolding. Advisors, aides, and close relatives stood by, their expressions frozen, as Prince William opened a leather-bound folder containing the Queen's last will and testament. For months, palace staff had guarded the Queen's final wishes with meticulous secrecy, deploying legal barriers and an in-house code of royal discretion. While the world mourned and tributes spread across global media, behind Windsor's thick walls lay instructions that shaped not just her material bequests, but also the monarchy's destiny. At the heart of these instructions loomed four names: Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, Archie Harrison, and Lilibet Diana. Ever since 2020, when Harry and Meghan dramatically distanced themselves from traditional royal duties, the institution had weathered unrelenting public fascination. Their explosive interviews, Netflix partnerships, memoir deals, and legal battles created a media circus that tested the resilience of the House of Windsor. Yet the Queen's personal view, widely speculated upon but never overtly stated, surfaced only now in a written clause that blindsided the entire royal circle. The directive wasn't concerned with wealth, property, or titles for longtime establishment players. Instead, it zeroed in on the uncertain future of Archie and Lilibet's standing within the monarchy. The handwritten text, scrawled by the Queen just months before her demise, carried an unequivocal tone. Titles are no birthright if the legacy is squandered. They must be earned, not inherited through scandal. With these words, Elizabeth II put forth a grim observation. In her estimation, Harry and Meghan had undermined the very institution they once served, and consequently, the children should not automatically receive the hereditary honors others had so easily presumed. What ensued was a potent shift of responsibility. Prince William, assigned executor of the Queen's private bequests, realized he would be forced to weigh loyalty to his younger brother against the last wishes of a grandmother, whose reign and sense of duty had spanned decades. Sources indicate that William read the text aloud in a sealed chamber reserved for senior royals only. King Charles, who had already begun molding the monarchy according to his vision, inclined his head in somber acceptance. Queen Camilla, no stranger to public controversy herself, stood by without resistance. Witnesses described an overpowering sense of finality, as though the Queen's posthumous words had dealt the last blow in a saga fueled by public rifts. News of Harry and Meghan's reaction spread at once. At their estate in Montecito, staff reported a frantic lockdown. Meghan reportedly broke down, tears in her eyes, while Harry was seen pacing and demanding immediate counsel from royal attorneys to see if this decree could be challenged. Rumors of heated phone calls surfaced, Harry supposedly contacting King Charles, Prince William, and even longtime allies in British media. But the Queen's words appeared both absolute and binding, less about petty retribution and more about safeguarding a legacy. The monarchy, as she perceived it, relied on loyalty and service. Through their public disclosures and legal suits, Harry and Meghan had betrayed these principles. Although the children themselves were innocent, she deemed them part of a narrative that demanded course correction. One tabloid called it the Queen's final blow, while another questioned whether the monarchy was truly restored or merely punishing dissent. In the United States, networks like CNN and NBC struggled to frame the development. Was this a justified consequence of Harry and Meghan's actions, or a petty institutional punishment? Inside Buckingham Palace, however, there was little room for debate. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, advisors closed ranks. According to senior insiders, the Queen's bequest was more than an institutional act. It was personal. She wanted her heirs and successors to understand that the monarchy stands for duty, not birthright or scandal. While some saw her final stipulation as a principled stance, others found it distressingly personal, an echo of heartbreak couched in the solemn language of royalty. By revoking the royal titles of Archie and Lilibet, the Queen sent a clear message that the institution she devoted her life to must be preserved with integrity, even if it meant making painful decisions that would reverberate through the family for years to come. For over 70 years, she had been the steadfast guardian of a delicate balance, an intricate system woven from tradition, modernity, diplomacy, and intense global scrutiny. When Harry and Meghan chose to step away from royal duties, openly sharing their story through revealing interviews and building a media presence, partly based on royal confidences, the Queen began drafting a document to safeguard the values she held dear. Some interpret this act as her way of firmly drawing a boundary, a clear line in the sand. Others see it as a deeply personal betrayal veiled in the formal language of royalty. Regardless of perspective, the consequences were profound and unmistakable. For the first time in recent royal history, the titles traditionally granted to the children of a royal heir were deliberately withheld, not because of constitutional rules, but due to a personal decision. Prince William, tasked with reading the Queen's will and upholding its directives, reportedly felt the weight of this responsibility heavily. Those close to him say he neither smiled nor celebrated. He fully grasped the gravity of the moment, both as a future monarch and as a brother. Yet he did not resist or challenge the decision. Instead, he carried out the duty with the same meticulousness and steadiness for which the Queen was renowned, calm, resolute, and without fanfare. Meanwhile, the repercussions continued to unfold. Meghan's legal team began exploring options for public responses, while public relations experts scrambled to reshape the narrative. In the wider arena of public sentiment, a familiar clash ensued. Advocates insisted the monarchy had the right, perhaps even the duty, to safeguard its reputation, while critics asserted that children should never be penalized for the perceived missteps of their parents. Soon, another remarkable disclosure emerged, buried within the late Queen's final testament, a paragraph addressed directly to King Charles. According to an individual claiming to have seen the original text, Elizabeth II gently reminded her son of his dual role, both as sovereign and as the custodian of the royal family's legacy. "Let duty, not sentiment, guide your hand," she reportedly wrote, not as a command, but as a mother's solemn plea to honor and continue her efforts. Those words, though few, cast everything in a stark new light. Stripping Archie and Lilibet of their royal designations became more than a symbolic act. It echoed across generations, making it clear that the monarchy would not reflexively pass on privileges to those who distanced themselves from it. In one decisive stroke, it set a precedent for how the crown might respond to future family disputes. No longer would birth alone guarantee elevation in the House of Windsor. Across the Atlantic in Montecito, repercussions lingered. Once championed as the monarchy's revitalizing future, Harry and Meghan now found themselves in a different kind of exile, one not defined solely by physical distance, but charged with layered meanings, emotional scars, and estrangement from the institution. And this is only the beginning. What looked at first like an internal family squabble has evolved into a very public statement about how the world's most recognizable monarchy intends to guard its legacy. The question of who gets to inherit titles and under what conditions touches on deeper themes about inheritance, legitimacy, and the continued relevance of an institution that once seemed inviolable. As the clamor of media coverage finally calmed, many pondered whether the Queen was justified in her decision, and just as urgently, what course Harry and Meghan would follow next. Time and again, observers described Queen Elizabeth II as the personification of duty itself, a monarch who always put the crown above her own wishes, who took service more seriously than sentiment. Outwardly, she was an icon of steady leadership and stoic composure. But behind palace doors, behind the carefully curated public face, dwelled an individual who was both mother and grandmother, quietly observing a fast-changing era that sometimes made her question whether the monarchy she cherished could endure. Her last years were punctuated by introspection, overshadowed by worldly chaos and personal sorrows. Among those sorrows was the tumult caused by her grandson, Prince Harry, and his wife, Meghan. Leaving official royal obligations was one thing, yet the subsequent on-camera interviews, allegations of racism, constant legal maneuvers, and a lucrative Netflix series led to a swirl of controversies capable of unraveling the foundations she had carefully preserved over her entire reign. While social media and talk shows seethed with commentary, few realized that the Queen was meticulously documenting her thoughts in private. Letters, notes, and journal-like reflections locked away in Windsor Castle. A top aide serving her final years spoke of how deeply the Queen grieved over the direction Harry and Meghan had taken, not out of anger, but from a profound sense of disappointment. It was as though the continuity of tradition she had worked so long to protect was slipping away in full public view. Palace staff recalled multiple instances in which she would linger by a window for hours, a beloved corgi resting at her side, murmuring words like, "What a waste," or "How quickly it all slips away," almost as though she were conversing with ghosts. The night she watched the Oprah interview alone in her room, she requested no interruptions from her staff. None were able to gauge her immediate reaction. But later that evening, she called for her personal secretary to bring her stately, cream-embossed writing paper. She spent many hours drafting correspondences by hand. Palace staff recalled multiple instances in which she would linger by a window for hours, a beloved corgi resting at her side, murmuring words like, "What a waste," or "How quickly it all slips away," almost as though she were conversing with ghosts. The night she watched the Oprah interview alone in her room, she requested no interruptions from her staff. None were able to gauge her immediate reaction. But later that evening, she called for her personal secretary to bring her stately, cream-embossed writing paper. She spent many hours drafting correspondences by hand. These letters were penned for no audience but her own. Part diary, part confession, they offered a candid look into the heartbreak of a monarch confronting what she perceived as both familial and institutional betrayal. Accounts from those who have glimpsed portions of these writings indicate that she was deeply convinced Meghan had misunderstood, or perhaps deliberately chosen, to distort the meaning of royal life. She worried that Meghan approached the monarchy more as a platform for personal projection than as a serious obligation to uphold centuries of tradition. Her complex feelings about Harry struck even deeper chords of sorrow. She had witnessed his evolution, a vivacious, mischievous child, then a distinguished soldier, and finally a man carrying significant emotional scars. As a grandmother, her love for him was fierce, but she could not ignore how his need for validation often seemed to drive impulsive decisions. In her eyes, Meghan supplied that validation, yet at a stark cost to Harry's relationship with the royal family. Certain moments crystallized these anxieties. One of the most disheartening, reportedly, was when the Queen received an early manuscript of Prince Harry's memoir, thanks to palace legal arrangements. She perused the pages that implied critique of Camilla, Charles, and even the Queen herself. At a certain passage, she closed the binder, folded her hands, and quietly said, "This must be the line." Over and over, staff members would hear her use the phrase "the line" in private discussions with her most senior advisors. In hushed conferences with her Lord Chamberlain and her legal counsel, the Queen laid out plans for her private will, a distinct document separate from her public testament, exempt from parliamentary oversight. She intended it not just to assign property or jewelry, but to chart the monarchy's trajectory. The possibility of stripping royal titles, especially those of Harry and Meghan's descendants, constituted a radical break with tradition in modern royal history. Some courtiers worried that Her Majesty lacked unilateral power for such a move. Others cautioned that the blowback could be monumental. Yet the Queen, projecting her familiar calm authority, reputedly answered with a conviction, "It is no scandal to correct a mistake, it is scandal to ignore one." She pressed on discreetly, drafting notes that would eventually form the backbone of her final instruction. According to palace insiders, in one letter, leaked only after her death, she wrote, "When titles are conferred by the Crown, then the Crown retains the right to rescind them should they be misused for personal profit or public spectacle." Her apprehensions extended not solely to Harry and Meghan's initial departure, but to the brand they built afterward. The interview circuits, the high-dollar production deals, and the unflinching critique of a monarchy they now seem to leverage for commercial advantage. What pained her most, however, was the potential legacy for future royals. Archie and Lilibet, although blameless, had been born into a maelstrom they did not create. Yet conferring standard titles on them posed, in her view, a perilous precedent that individuals could openly reject the crown while still claiming its benefits for their lineage. She worried that royal titles could devolve into marketing gimmicks rather than enduring symbols of responsibility. According to confidants, her motivation was never to punish Archie and Lilibet, but rather to uphold the monarchy's sanctity, an institution she felt had to remain rooted in duty, not opportunism. Hoping to solidify this stance, she consulted a tight circle of constitutional scholars, legal counselors, and senior royals, painstakingly confirming that her decision would not undermine the monarchy's reputation, but instead reinforce its moral core. One advisor recounted her exact words, "I must leave this place stronger than I found it." This guiding mantra, shaping her reign from its earliest days, anchored her final resolutions. There was no thirst for vengeance, no outburst of temper, only a resolute calm as she committed her will to paper. "The monarchy is not a club of privilege," she affirmed in her written instructions, "but a chain of service, each link bound by honor and accountability. Those who step away may do so freely, but they must relinquish the crown's favor and its titles." And yet, behind the resolve and formality, Queen Elizabeth remained a grandmother. Private letters, reportedly tucked into the royal archives, testify that she wrote to Harry for personal reasons, not as a monarch making a statement, but as a grandmother seeking peace. "You were always my boy," she confided in one such note, "but a crown cannot be inherited by rebellion. One must serve before one may lead." Those weighty words captured her simultaneous heartbreak and devotion to her role as the figurehead of the realm and as a guardian of tradition. Over the months leading up to her passing, the Queen drew solace from her decisions. Aides remarked on her sense of acceptance, as though she believed her actions could remind future royals that wearing a title, sash, or crown means more than ceremony. It demands moral commitment each day. Consequently, while the world grieved her loss en masse, few realized she had authored a powerful new chapter in royal history, one with repercussions echoing across entire continents and compelling Britons, Americans, and the monarchy itself to question the essence of royalty in the modern era. Her final days were steeped in time-honored rituals of mourning, solemn black apparel on news anchors worldwide, the throngs of mourners depositing bouquets outside royal residences, and the heavy clang of Westminster bells. Beneath those grand gestures, a private drama played out in the halls of Windsor and Balmoral. Even as the world fixated on the formalities of her state funeral, palace officials turned their attention to the Queen's final testament. Most people presumed it would entail the usual bequests, distribution of landholdings, personal funds, or treasured jewels. Unbeknownst to them, she had composed two separate wills, one public, subject to certain legal formalities, and another cloaked in the highest secrecy. Housed in a climate-controlled vault beneath Windsor Castle, that second private will lay concealed from nearly everyone. By royal protocol, its access was controlled by the Lord Chamberlain and a single member of the royal family the Queen had personally appointed, Prince William. According to staffers, this choice was no happenstance. In her twilight years, the Queen increasingly confided in William, viewing him as steady, discreet, and unwaveringly devoted to the monarchy, qualities she deemed essential for her ultimate successor. A hush blanketed Windsor Castle on the day this private will was retrieved. Witnesses described the act as solemn, almost hallowed. The Queen's testament rested in a regal red folio stamped with her official insignia, inside of which were handwritten pages, some sealed in envelopes labeled for particular individuals: King Charles, Camilla, William, Princess Anne, and one especially sensitive missive marked for Harry. Soon thereafter, William and the Lord Chamberlain quietly transported the will to Balmoral Castle, where the royal family had converged to both mourn her passing and chart the uncertain road ahead. Balmoral, the Queen's treasured summer sanctuary, offered a buffer against London's prying eyes, a calm place for private reflection. On one evening, in a wood-paneled lounge historically used to host Winston Churchill, Prince William gathered the family in a semicircle. Among those present were King Charles and Camilla, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie, alongside a select few trusted courtiers. Notably absent were Harry and Meghan, who had chosen to remain in California, reportedly wary of being sidelined and increasingly distant from Charles and William. A palace aide close to the proceedings likened the atmosphere to a crossroads. William opened the leather folio, cleared his throat, and read the Queen's words aloud. At first, they dealt with personal bequests, philanthropic legacies, and tokens for loyal staff, sentiments reminiscent of any well-structured estate plan. But as William reached the middle of the document, the tone shifted. Here, the Queen began to articulate her reflections on the state of the royal family, not with emotional language, but with the clarity and precision of a seasoned stateswoman. She wrote about a changing world, the evolving role of the monarchy in modern society, and the critical importance of preserving its moral authority. She acknowledged the pressures of globalization, the invasive nature of social media, and warned against allowing tradition to be manipulated for personal advantage. Then came the section that would alter everything. In firm and deliberate language, the Queen expressed profound concern over the choices made by her grandson Harry and his wife Meghan. Her Majesty acknowledged Harry and Meghan's prerogative to step away from official duties, yet she also lamented how their newfound independence had often served to criticize, expose, and, using her words, exploit the very institution they once vowed to uphold. In her private notes, she wrote pointedly, "I firmly believe that titles granted by the Crown should represent service rendered to the Crown." She then added, "In the cases of Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, I implore my successor to withhold any princely designations unless future conduct warrants a reversal of this position. Let no one interpret this as punishment." Far from targeting her great-grandchildren, the Queen saw this as a protective measure for them, for the monarchy, and for the nature of royal inheritance itself. The moment those sentences were read aloud, an uneasy hush gripped the gathering. Even Camilla, typically composed, sat in utter stillness. Prince William's voice, though steady, carried an undercurrent of tension as he delivered the Queen's decree. Her decision not only deviated from a centuries-old norm, but practically cast a directive from beyond the grave upon King Charles himself. And, as those present recognized, it was not motivated by bitterness. It was, in the Queen's view, a method of preserving the crown, of reaffirming that it stands above controversies or individual aspirations. This directive went beyond the matter of Archie and Lilibet. In the Queen's estimation, it shaped the crown's future. King Charles reportedly pressed his fingertips together beneath his chin, sat quietly for some time, then, according to a first-hand account, gave a measured nod, saying, "She made her choice, and we will abide by it." No one applauded, no one cheered. Instead, they absorbed the enormity of what had just been confirmed. The Queen had entrusted them with a final, solemn responsibility. By the following morning, the substance of the Queen's verdict reached Harry and Meghan in California via their legal team. Protocol didn't require the palace to notify them at once, but courtesy prevailed. By many accounts, their reaction was profound dismay. Meghan, who believed the Queen had gradually softened toward them in her latter days, was reportedly blindsided. Harry, distant though he was, had not anticipated this posthumous twist. In a flurry of activity at Montecito, attorneys and PR strategists scrambled to coordinate a formal response, but chaos reigned. Calls went unanswered, staff seemed at a loss, and the Sussex's communications office was caught off guard. Meanwhile, back at Balmoral, William and King Charles, aware of the media wildfire that would soon flare, conferred privately on how and when to share the Queen's directive publicly. They recognized that withholding the information would breed even wilder theories, yet making it official would inevitably set off massive debates. Within days, Buckingham Palace issued a carefully phrased announcement grounded in the Queen's private wishes and backed by King Charles III. Archie and Lilibet would not be accorded princely status at this time. The fallout was swift and incendiary. Headlines screamed betrayal, commentators polarized into camps praising or damning the monarchy's choice, while some lauded the Queen for safeguarding her institution's moral fiber. Others denounced the step as unjust punishment upon innocent children. Yet, in the quiet halls of Balmoral, where the will had been read, an atmosphere of calm resolve prevailed. To William, this move was a pivot in the monarchy's evolution. No longer just the grandson of a formidable queen, he had become the keeper of her vision. As for King Charles, it signaled a chance to define a monarchy that strove for continuity and order over emotion-driven compromise. Among every clause in Queen Elizabeth II's private will, None sparked fiercer debate than a short paragraph near its final pages, soon labeled the Bombshell Clause by palace insiders and global headlines alike. The text itself was brief and unadorned, yet the impact was stunning. Its direct challenge to what most believed a sacrosanct truth, that royal offspring automatically receive exalted titles, unleashed an unparalleled level of scrutiny. Leaked sources from Buckingham Palace reported the clause read, "In my capacity as sovereign and matriarch, I wish that no princely or princess titles be bestowed upon the children of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Let all remember that a title reflects service, not mere lineage. Legacy does not arise through inheritance alone, but through integrity. Withhold such honors unless, and until, personal merit and demonstrated loyalty to the crown justify reconsideration." The initial reaction when these words were read aloud by Prince William at Balmoral was silence, not from confusion or misunderstanding, but because everyone present immediately grasped the monumental significance. This clause marked the first time in living memory that a monarch had not only questioned, but formally acted against the automatic granting of princely titles to royal descendants. The Queen's decision to withhold the titles of Prince and Princess from Archie and Lilibet was not merely symbolic, it was revolutionary. To fully appreciate the weight of this decision, one must understand the traditional process by which royal titles are granted. Under the 1917 Letters Patent issued by King George V, it was established that the titles of prince or princess are traditionally granted to the sovereign's children, the sovereign's grandchildren through the male line, and the eldest son of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales. This system was slightly adjusted in 2012 by Queen Elizabeth II to allow all children of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, William and Catherine, to hold royal titles regardless of their gender. According to these rules, once King Charles III became sovereign, Archie and Lilibet should have automatically qualified for princely designations. Yet, this situation presented a glaring contradiction. Queen Elizabeth II, who placed great weight on tradition, also recognized the need for protocol to adapt to a rapidly changing era. More pressingly, she believed that titles should remain a genuine symbol of honor, reserved for those who continued to serve the institution responsibly, rather than those who turned it into a point of controversy. Since Harry and Meghan's exit from royal duties and subsequent media engagements casting the royal family in a critical light, the meaning behind those titles risked being diluted. If Archie and Lilibet were granted the rank of prince and princess under these circumstances, what precedent might it set? Would it signal that the crown merely hands out privileges while ignoring the values it stands for? Would it encourage future heirs to capitalize on regal status even as they distance themselves from the obligations that status entails? In the Queen's mind, the answer was unequivocally no. Her stance did not seek to cast blame on Archie and Lilibet personally. By all accounts, Queen Elizabeth harbored affection for every one of her great-grandchildren. She had met Archie briefly and had expressed the wish to meet Lilibet in person, an encounter that, tragically, never occurred. Insiders maintained that she bore no resentment toward the children themselves. Instead, her decision stemmed from a more profound worry that in an era dominated by instant media coverage, where perception can swiftly overshadow reality, royal honors could become little more than marketing tools. Her fear was that a monarchy already under relentless public scrutiny might be mocked as hypocritical or rudderless if it allowed individuals to walk away from palace responsibilities only to keep leveraging regal titles for personal gain. Having spent decades safeguarding the monarchy's image, she grasped that any damage to its reputation might prove irreversible. Therefore, she delineated a clear boundary, something that only a monarch of her stature could do. Yet the Queen's clause was no blanket condemnation. She framed it with carefully chosen wording. By declaring, unless and until such time as personal merit and loyalty to the crown deem them appropriate, she left open a pathway, not for automatic reinstatement, but for a future earned on the basis of service. In effect, she shifted the focus from inheritance to commitment. Legally, the arrangement offered both closure and flexibility, acting less as a firm denial and more as a structured challenge placed before Harry and Meghan's children. If, in their adulthood, Archie and Lilibet choose to support the crown and exhibit devotion, then the question of conferring royal status remains an option. But it will not simply be gifted through birthright, it must be merited. One of the most cited passages from the will describes titles as a reflection of service, not simply of lineage. This crystallized the Queen's lifelong ethos. Monarchy entails a duty-driven life, not a ticket to fame or exclusivity. As for the broader public, reactions have predictably split along stark lines. Traditionalists applaud the Queen for making a bold update to how the crown hands out privileges, validating her belief that rank should be grounded in responsibility and not awarded as a blank check. Others, however, found the move harsh, especially those sympathetic to Meghan, who argued that Archie and Lilibet were penalized for decisions outside their control. Critics claimed it was a heartbreakingly severe stance by a royal establishment that, in their view, had never fully welcomed Meghan in the first place. The debate erupted on social media, where American talk shows decried the measure as punitive, while some UK tabloids praised it as a precise course correction. Beneath the media furor, constitutional authorities maintained a more balanced view. They saw in the Queen's provision a careful maneuver that avoided parliamentary meddling by placing the question of royal titles in a private will, preserving an adaptable solution rather than a permanent alienation, and handing the final determination over to the monarch who succeeded her. For King Charles, though privately troubled as a grandfather, there was little to argue. He grasped the weight of his mother's testament. In a fragmented world skeptical of inherited authority, clarity had become the monarchy's greatest strength. By addressing the matter in her private will, she avoided parliamentary interference. By linking titles to merit, she prevented a permanent severance of ties. And by entrusting the final decision to her successor, King Charles, she ensured continuity while maintaining accountability. King Charles reportedly accepted the clause without objection. Though the decision weighed heavily on him, especially as a grandfather, he recognized its long-term importance. The monarchy could no longer afford ambiguity. With public trust in institutions declining worldwide, clarity had become its most valuable asset. The atmosphere after the reading of the will was quiet yet determined. There were no cheers or congratulatory gestures, just a shared understanding that something irreversible had taken place, marking the start of a new royal era. The full impact of this moment on Archie and Lilibet will only become clear with time. For now, they remain young children, too inexperienced to comprehend the significance of their royal heritage or the responsibilities that might have accompanied it. However, as they grow older and begin to inquire about their family history, they will come to realize that their titles were not withheld out of spite, but based on principle. How they respond to this revelation, whether with bitterness or a renewed sense of purpose, will largely depend on how their parents choose to explain it. Will Harry and Meghan eventually see this as a heavy but inevitable consequence of their actions, or will they cast it as an unthinkable injustice inflicted on their children? Queen Elizabeth II recognized the outcry her decision would provoke, yet she made it nonetheless. For her, the monarchy had never been about easing anyone's path. It had always been about duty, and that duty required clarity, integrity, and the courage to say no, even to family members. If anyone felt the weight of Queen Elizabeth II's final will more profoundly than others, it was Prince William, not merely because he was her grandson or the heir apparent after King Charles, but because the Queen entrusted him with more than just a responsibility. She entrusted him with her legacy. Historically, a monarch's executors have functioned discreetly in legal or private palace settings, handling administrative formalities. Yet this case was different, and so were the obligations William now shouldered. By designating William as executor of her private will, the Queen did more than signal faith in his sense of judgment. She elevated him from a mere successor to the throne to a custodian of her vision, someone who would inherit not just regal authority, but a weighty obligation to speak truths that other family members might be too mired in emotion or conflict to articulate. Insiders familiar with the Queen's final years say she chose William after careful observation of the entire family's response to scandals and upheavals. Whether it was Prince Andrew's disgrace, Prince Harry's abrupt departure, or the challenges of King Charles's early reign, William had consistently demonstrated calm restraint, remaining close to palace operations and stepping up as needed, traits reminiscent of the Queen's own leadership. Nothing could have prepared William fully for the ordeal that awaited him. On the day he opened the Queen's private will alongside the Lord Chamberlain in Windsor Castle's secure vault, witnesses say he spent over an hour reading every page. The stately red folio that housed her final instructions was painstakingly organized with handwritten pages, directives, and sealed envelopes addressed to specific individuals. Among them was one bearing William's name in the Queen's elegant script. Inside, he found a terse yet powerful letter in which she wrote, "Lead by resolve, not by rage. When safeguarding the crown costs you your personal comfort, you must accept that burden. You are no longer only my grandson. You are a future king." This guiding principle shaped William's approach in the tumultuous days that followed. As executor, he had to authenticate the will with legal advisors, implement every detail precisely when the Queen had specified, and, perhaps most critically, deliver her words to the family with the honesty and devotion the monarchy required. The instructions regarding Archie and Lilibet were the most fraught of all, intensifying the already tense standoff between him and Harry. Though once inseparable, the brothers had become deeply estranged by years of media statements, accusations, and sorrow. Despite the toll this might take on his relationship with Harry, William stayed the course. He convened a confidential family council at Balmoral Castle, far from public prying eyes or press intrusions. Reports indicate that he remained composed and resolute in the meeting. He did not soften the Queen's statements to spare anyone's feelings, nor did he push his personal preferences. He simply read each clause of the will in the order it was written, pausing at more sensitive sections. And when he reached the part about Harry and Meghan's children, onlookers noted how his voice gained an extra firmness, not from anger, but from a sense of fidelity to the Queen's legacy. At no time did William offer his own opinion on whether the Queen's dictates were correct or harsh. Instead, he underscored his role. As executor, he was to uphold her will as precisely as she had laid it out. Witnesses recall how this steadfast approach caught King Charles's attention. Charles, who had long cherished his son, yet had occasionally been criticized for faltering under conflict or public pressure. William, by contrast, appeared steady as a rock, unwavering even in the face of unparalleled family turmoil. Of course, such composure exacted a personal price. William had taken on not just the mechanical task of distributing bequests or reading instructions, but the burden of marking out an unambiguous line between what once was and what would be, between family loyalties and institutional necessity, between private affections and the demands of principle. He knew it would widen the rift with Harry, likely for years to come. According to insiders stationed at Kensington Palace, the aftermath of that pivotal Balmoral assembly saw Prince William spending multiple late-night stretches isolated in his private office. He pored over the Queen's handwritten notes, conferred quietly with trusted advisors, and braced himself mentally for the storm that would surely follow. He realized that the wider public would soon regard him not merely as the executor of his grandmother's will, but as the very embodiment of a decision that placed tradition above familial loyalty and pitted him, visibly, against his own brother. Yet William saw no real alternative. He had long acknowledged that his destiny involved public service, and that such a life demanded sacrifice. In his eyes, the Queen had not intended to sever family bonds, but to safeguard a vision of the monarchy she had spent her reign constructing. When the time came to reveal the decision publicly, William took a hands-on role in formulating the official announcement. He insisted on language that was calm, reflective, and devoid of inflammatory undertones. The final statement made it plain that the Queen wished to withhold royal titles at this time, hinting that the issue could be revisited in the future, but making equally clear just how significant her directive was. From start to finish, William strived to mirror his grandmother's measured stance, resolute, yet not vindictive. Predictably, the backlash arrived with unbridled force. Certain commentators accused William of masterminding the title revocations. Heated arguments lit up social media. In the United States, pundits hypothesized about some personal vendetta. In the UK, royal watchers portrayed William as a newly assertive figure overshadowing Harry. Still, William kept his silence. He granted no interviews and offered no surreptitious tips to the press. He merely continued his standard engagements, school visits, military commemorations, preparations for a fresh chapter in the monarchy. He let his actions, rather than his words, tell the story. Confidants say that privately, William experienced moments of profound sorrow. Even though he believed the Queen's will had to be honored, he mourned the brother he once knew, his partner in childhood pranks, in shared grief over their mother's death, in the frenetic joys of youth. Now that bond lay overshadowed by this final testament from the Queen. Some palace sources believe William remains open to reconciliation, though only under conditions he views as non-negotiable. For William, his role as the executor of this crucial document was transformative, reshaping not just his relationship with Harry, but also his grasp of leadership's demands. Observers say it highlighted that passive monarchy is a thing of the past. In entrusting him with her personal instructions, the Queen effectively set a test for William, one he had to take on the global stage under the scrutiny of fans, critics, and historians. And by all accounts, he succeeded. His faithful execution of the Queen's private will became more than an act of obligation. It signaled a defining step in the making of a future king. A sovereign who would be guided not simply by birthright, but by strength of conviction. By affirming the Queen's final wish, William delivered an unmistakable message both to his family and the wider world. A monarchy that hopes to endure must be safeguarded with clarity, bravery, and unyielding principles. Meanwhile, daybreak in Montecito, California, brought a seismic jolt for Meghan Markle. In most corners of the state, people went about their routine, sending early messages, sipping fresh brewed coffee, wrangling children out of bed. But for Meghan, a single piece of correspondence changed everything before she could truly begin her day. In a matter of minutes, the foundation she had carefully cultivated through interviews, media appearances, brand deals, and global visibility began unraveling by way of quietly devastating printed words. No pompous royal dispatch or phone call arrived to cushion the blow. Instead, it took the form of a brisk, official statement from legal counsel. Archie and Lilibet would not be entitled to princely or princess titles. The Queen's final testament had expressly barred it. The phrasing in the message was unequivocal. These designations could not, in the Queen's view, be inherited by any whose identities had become entwined in estrangement and controversy, detached from the monarchy's guiding ethos. The immediate effect was palpable. A staff member at Meghan's Montecito home later described how she'd been preparing for a routine video call, dressed in a relaxed silk robe, a steaming cup of tea on the table, her mood serene. Then her assistant delivered the legal missive, and everything shifted. Her composure vanished, the calm in her face dissipating. She read through it once, then again, then sat frozen as though pinned by shock. For nearly 10 minutes, she did not speak or move. When she finally stirred, it was not in anger so much as in stunned recognition of what was lost. A profound chill creeping through the cracks of her security. She requested privacy and closed the door behind her. What transpired in that room over the next hour remains a mystery. However, when she reappeared, her mascara was smudged, and her voice betrayed her distress. That day, the staff was sent home early, and the children were kept indoors under the watchful eyes of their nannies, who were instructed not to turn on any televisions or allow access to phones. From the outside, Montecito might have projected images of sun-soaked lawns and palm tree tranquility, but that morning it became an emotional cage. To fully appreciate Meghan Markle's response, you have to look beyond her outward polished persona, the Hollywood adept Duchess. This crisis extended well past the question of a royal title. For Meghan, it was tied to legacy, identity, and a mother's fierce pride in her children. Ever since stepping into the world's most scrutinized family, she had labored to shape a narrative that her children deserved the same stature as any royal offspring. The Queen's verdict decisively shattered that conviction. In Meghan's view, this was more than a show of institutional consistency. It felt deeply, inescapably personal. Close confidants of the Sussexes say that Meghan's immediate impulse was to reach out to her legal teams in both Los Angeles and London. She demanded clear answers. Was it even lawful for the Queen to take such a step? Might King Charles opt to reverse it? Could they orchestrate public pressure or release a formal objection? But the replies trickled in more slowly than she hoped, and none offered the reassurance she craved. Because the Queen's will was private, it stood on unassailable legal ground. Charles, for his part, possessed the power to reinterpret its stipulations, but palace sources confirmed he had no intention of overruling his mother's final edict. Even had he wished to, doing so would mean opening a constitutional can of worms that the monarchy was unwilling to face. These conclusions sparked in Meghan not outbursts of anger, but a deeper sense of personal betrayal. In her eyes, this wasn't about the crown rectifying some oversight. It struck her as a direct affront to her children's birthright, to her motherhood, and to the life she had fought to build for Archie and Lilibet. She had for years expressed in interviews and conversations the conviction that Archie and Lilibet deserved full recognition, not simply because of the bloodline, but because they were royal in every sense. Now that recognition had been revoked in one conclusive, very public manner. A close friend of Meghan's, someone who had attended her baby shower in New York and remained a loyal confidant in California, spoke of Meghan's heartbreak, not just at the decision itself, but at the sense of permanence. For Meghan, it was as if an iron door had slammed shut on her children's future status in the royal fold. That was the wound that cut deepest. Predictably, the response within the Sussex household followed a familiar pattern: crisis management, strategic meetings, frantic conversations. Meghan summoned her PR advisors, many of whom had steered her through prior media upheavals, her Oprah broadcast, her podcast, her publishing endeavors. The group offered conflicting guidance. Some argued silence would serve her best, cautioning that any vocal retaliation might play into the palace's hands. Others suggested a subtle approach, perhaps a single, carefully curated interview or a reflective piece with a sympathetic journalist that let Meghan's perspective be heard without provoking a full-blown backlash. Still, Meghan felt uncertain. She longed to reclaim a sense of control over the public narrative, over her children's stories, over the next chapter of her family's life. Later in the day, she reportedly phoned her mother, Doria Ragland, and they spoke for nearly an hour. Insiders close to Doria say she urged calm, warning Meghan to think beyond the immediate furor and consider how Archie and Lilibet would perceive her handling of this moment. Dignity will outlast any lost title, Doria supposedly counseled, suggesting that her behavior throughout this ordeal would become a legacy far more meaningful than any formal honor the palace could grant. Those words lingered in Meghan's mind, but so did the hurt. That evening, she and Harry wandered quietly among the gardens of their Montecito home. Archie was already fast asleep. Lilibet had been put down earlier. It was the type of serene Californian night that usually let the headlines slip away. But not this time. The hush pressed in on them, bearing the weight of unspoken anxieties. At last, Meghan broke the silence. "They've taken everything," she reportedly said. "What else can they take?" Harry, who often served as her emotional anchor in tempests like this, had no ready answer. He was wounded too by the Queen's posthumous pronouncement. But for Meghan, the pain was different. To her, a door that had never fully opened was now bolted shut with legal finality. Her children would grow up without the royal identity she believed they had earned by blood and by name. From an outside perspective, Montecito might have seemed a tranquil paradise, yet on that particular morning, it turned into an emotional prison. For Meghan, this was about far more than a royal formality. This was about defending the story she had been painstakingly crafting. The belief that her children had every right to be seen as equals, to hold their own place in the royal family. With one quiet stroke, the Queen's posthumous decision stripped away that vision. In Meghan's eyes, this was no mere institutional adjustment. It cut painfully close to the heart. She had for years built a public narrative, deliberately or not, about the injustice she and Harry experienced within the firm. That image underpinned their media appeal, their lucrative deals, their spot in the cultural conversation. Now this shocking twist threatened to reshape how others perceived them. If the monarchy had gone so far as to reject even the Sussex children, what did that say about the couple's story? Would Meghan still be cast as the wronged party? Or would audiences start to question whether she had isolated herself through her own actions? That same night, sources indicate Meghan wrote a lengthy letter, though no one is entirely sure to whom it was addressed. Some believe it might have been meant for King Charles or Prince William. Others suspect it was intended for her own children. Whatever the truth, she reportedly wrote late into the night, pausing occasionally to inhale deeply or gather her composure. Sometime before dawn, she emerged from her study, silent, and retired to her room. During the following days, the Sussex household slammed shut the gate on communications. There were no official press releases. Meghan delayed launching her newest podcast, pulled back from scheduled public engagements, and responded to journalistic inquiries with a wall of silence. Yet, behind the scenes, subtle shifts were already in motion. Suggestions arose about a new documentary endeavor focusing on motherhood and legacy, an attempt to carve out a narrative wholly removed from royal titles and the palace's established framework. Reportedly, multiple major networks reached out to Meghan with offers to host her viewpoint. Rumors also circulated about refocusing the Archewell Foundation toward themes of identity, children's well-being, and inclusiveness on a global scale. Increasingly, the debate for Meghan was not about regaining any crown or regal label. It was about protecting her sense of self-worth. She might have lost ground within the royal sphere, but she was adamant about safeguarding her children's future on her own terms. Yet, despite the neatly orchestrated silence and attempts to re-spin the story, insiders close to Meghan say she still feels the sting of the Queen's final move. It remains fresh, raw, and final. Whispers have spread that Meghan could someday author a memoir of her own. And if that happens, this chapter, the day she learned Archie and Lilibet would be denied princely standing, will likely feature prominently. For now, though, she finds herself in Montecito, navigating the fallout in near silence. Sometimes, in a world shaped by incessant media spotlights and social feeds, the most profound drama unfolds in the hush between official statements. The notice itself arrived without fanfare, lacking any sense of confrontation or royal pomp. Thousands of miles away at his Montecito home, Prince Harry received a private call from Buckingham Palace. He had been standing barefoot in his garden, the whispering Pacific breeze swirling around, when he answered. He had no warning that the next few minutes would irrevocably change how he viewed his family, and possibly how he viewed himself. According to insiders, a senior aide to King Charles delivered the information. The message was succinct, unemotional. The Queen's private will, disclosed at Balmoral, dictated that Archie and Lilibet would not receive titles. This decision carried the King's endorsement and had been formally enacted by Prince William in his capacity as executor. In that moment, time seemed suspended. Harry reportedly stood without speaking, eyes drifting across the Santa Barbara hills, jaw set. Only after nearly a minute passed did he quietly say, "Thank you," before disconnecting. But it was then, associates say, that the cracks truly began to form. Inside the house, Meghan waited on the sofa, watching Harry's figure through the glass doors. She saw him hesitate, the phone still in his grip, as though locked in shock. Then she witnessed him break down. Crossing the threshold in silence, he dropped the phone onto the counter and sank into a chair. His hands quivered, his gaze fixed on the floor. A witness says his shoulders shook as he struggled for breath, tears overwhelming him in a way they seldom had before. This was the first time in years Prince Harry had wept openly. Like the small boy who had walked behind his mother's casket under the scrutinizing gaze of millions, never shedding a tear in public. In that moment, it wasn't just about missing out on a title or the Queen's final testament. It was the painful realization that he could never fully elude the institution he had walked away from. A close friend from Harry's army days explained that he had always grappled with his identity, the spare rather than the heir, the supportive brother, the family's lightning rod. Abandoning his official duties was more than a departure. It was an attempt to escape. But this revelation showed him the cost of that escape, crystallized in his two children's names, Archie and Lilibet. For Harry, the greatest dread lay in the possibility that Archie and Lilibet might one day blame him, that they might interpret his decision to leave as the reason they were denied their rightful legacy. He had told himself for years that titles were meaningless, that affection and freedom mattered more, that California offered a happier life than Windsor's constraints. Yet, buried deep inside him, there was still a part that yearned for the Queen's admiration, that believed in the monarchy's legitimacy, and that hoped Archie and Lilibet would eventually claim their rightful royal place. Instead, the exact opposite came to pass. The Queen's declaration effectively barred any path back in. Prince Harry, who once called her Granny, realized she had drawn a definitive boundary. And this was no oversight but a conscious act. Royal biographers who studied the Queen's final months note that Harry hadn't met privately with her for nearly a year before her death, and their last in-person exchange was short and perfunctory, leaving scant chance for reconciliation. Despite all that had gone wrong, Harry had hoped her affections might spare his children from the institution's strict parameters, never anticipating a clause so pointedly stating that titles must be earned, not merely bestowed under scandal's shadow. In the ensuing days, Harry's demeanor visibly changed. Friends and coworkers noted a pronounced retreat from public life. He declined phone calls, put off his philanthropic obligations, and instructed his Netflix team to halt work on their current projects. Rather than heading outdoors or meeting visitors, he cloistered himself, sometimes spending hours in Archie's nursery, perhaps looking for the untainted innocence he felt was being exploited. Other times, he'd slip out into the garden in the small hours, barefoot on the grass while everyone else slept. A close companion who visited him that week described a Harry they'd never seen, drained, subdued, devoid of anger, but somehow hollow. Some suggested he approach King Charles for emotional support. Meghan agreed, and some trusted advisors did too. But Harry stood back. He knew his father had ratified the Queen's clause, possibly out of loyalty to her or a sincere belief in it, and that silence felt like a testament in itself. The unsettling possibility that William, too, sanctioned the decision only made things worse. In his eyes, William's role as executor wasn't just procedural, it felt meticulous, deliberate, final. This stark unity of father and brother confirmed the old suspicion that he was isolated, not just geographically or professionally, but emotionally. Meghan, typically poised under stress, confided to a confidant that Harry's mental state was a genuine worry. "He's drifting away," she said, according to that friend. "He's not livid, he's hurt, and I'm not sure how to help him come through this." Eventually, Harry turned inward, journaling his children letters, recollections of his youth, and reflections on duty, betrayal, and grief. Friends say these writings could be the most revealing and emotionally raw testimony he's ever put on paper, perhaps setting the stage for a future memoir with an introspective tone. For the moment, though, these pages remain private. On the public stage, the Sussexes simply went silent. No official response, no broadcast interviews, no social media posts. It was a rare departure from their usual candid approach. Some interpreted the quiet as a sign of growing composure, while others read it as resignation. But palace insiders suspect it sprang from a deeper sense of heartbreak. Harry had always cared for his grandmother, despite years of tension. Learning that her final act drew a line that barred his children's connection to a regal heritage he believed was rightfully theirs proved devastating. As he wrote in a letter to one friend, "I've lost her twice, once when she passed and once in her parting words." For Harry, it was not a matter of titles and prestige, but love and deep personal rejection. He had been taught that family stands together above all else, yet here he stood, cast on the other side of a boundary, drawn by the very woman who once clasped his hand on the balcony at Buckingham Palace. One day he might accept it as an inevitable, if painful, consequence of forging a new path apart from royal tradition. But for now, in that moment and that week, it cut him in a way no war zone, media onslaught, or paternal feud ever had. The blow had come from the grandmother he once adored, who, even from beyond the grave, had upheld an unbreakable line in the regal sand. Meanwhile, back in London, King Charles III, who had waited more than 70 years to take on the throne, found that his reign began overshadowed by loss. No amount of advanced planning had steeled him for the emotional, symbolic, and constitutional burdens of carrying out his mother's final wishes. And among those orders, the topic of Archie and Lilibet's titles loomed larger than any other. The Queen's passing had already frayed the family's delicate unity. Though the grandeur of the funeral offered an outward display of harmony, a quieter undercurrent of discord churned beneath. Once the ceremonies concluded and the mourning attire was folded away, the reality of governing set in. Even though the Queen's private will was unknown to the public at that time, its directives were already prompting a chain of weighty decisions. None were more scrutinized, especially from within Buckingham Palace, than those pertaining to two children who had never walked its corridors. King Charles read his mother's directive regarding Archie and Lilibet alone in the green drawing room, surrounded by paintings of monarchs past. A near palpable solemnity saturated the space. The Queen's handwriting, both methodical and elegant, left no space for doubt. Her statement was not a suggestion, but an unequivocal instruction. Titles ought to be merited, not inherited through turmoil. These words followed Charles long after he put the will aside. They weren't harsh, but they were unmistakably pointed, compelling him to confront the challenge at the heart of his reign: how to maintain the relevance of the crown while dealing with a thoroughly modern family schism. This was more than a private matter. It was a symbolic move that would shape his early rule. Unlike his mother, Charles had typically shown more emotion. He was reflective, chatty, and sometimes uncertain. As Prince of Wales, he had spent decades wavering between tradition and modernity, often stumbling amid shifting public sentiments. But as king, he could no longer afford indecision. He had to proceed swiftly and with conviction. Within hours of reading the will, Charles assembled his closest advisors, including the Lord Chamberlain, his private secretary, and the legal team. Behind closed doors, they combed through every paragraph of the Queen's private testament, scrutinizing the constitutional ramifications of each request. Most of her stipulations were straightforward: personal bequests, estate distributions, memorial guidelines. Yet the clause concerning Archie and Lilibet fueled immediate debate. Some of Charles' advisors urged restraint, cautioning that withholding titles might appear petty or politically risky. After all, Harry and Meghan retained a notable following, particularly in parts of the Commonwealth's younger demographic. Others, however, insisted that the Queen's reasoning was solid. Bestowing titles on children raised outside the institution, whose parents had openly critiqued it, could chip away at the moral foundation of the crown. Charles weighed these arguments, then reportedly spoke words that surprised the room. "My mother's voice must not fade simply because her eyes have closed." That pronouncement settled it. King Charles declared his intention to respect his mother's private will, including her decision to withhold the princely titles from Archie and Lilibet. He emphasized that this was not a rejection of his grandchildren, but an affirmation of the very tenets the Queen had championed throughout her lifetime, tenets she had now entrusted to him. In the days that followed, Charles moved with methodical care to implement the decision. He ordered a review by the Royal Legal Council to confirm its constitutional soundness and tasked palace communication staff with crafting a statement in precise, respectful language, ensuring no suggestion that the children were being punished. Finally, in a gesture charged with emotion, Charles sat at his writing desk to compose 2 letters, one to Harry, one to Meghan. The exact contents remain undisclosed, but a senior palace aide involved in their delivery said Charles penned them by hand, folded them twice, sealed them with his royal wax imprint, and had them dispatched to Montecito via diplomatic courier. Charles hoped to speak to them as both father and grandfather, not just as a sovereign. He wanted them to learn of his decision from him directly, rather than from an impersonal press release. In those letters, Charles reportedly expressed sorrow rather than anger, acknowledging the emotional toll this choice would inevitably cause and emphasizing that it had not been reached lightly. He wrote of duty, legacy, and the enduring affection he still felt for his son and grandchildren. At the same time, he underscored that the monarchy must reflect values of honor, sacrifice, and service, and that titles without these bedrocks could have no real meaning. Both letters ended with one consistent refrain: "You will always be part of this family, but the crown must walk forward." In California, the response was muted. Still grappling with the contents of the Queen's will, Harry is said to have read his father's words in silence. Meghan called the tone courteous but distant, feeling it was more a formal royal statement masked as compassion than an intimate plea from a father and grandfather. No matter how they felt about it, the king believed he had fulfilled his obligations. A cordial yet unyielding boundary was drawn, and Buckingham Palace moved ahead with an official announcement. Confirming the Queen's private instructions, the palace declared that the titles of Prince and Princess would not be conferred on Archie and Lilibet, albeit leaving open the possibility of revisiting the matter at some later time. Public opinion was swift and polarized. Monarchists applauded it as a brave, necessary act to uphold the royal family's dignity, praising Charles's firm leadership and continuity. Critics, especially in the United States, deemed it spiteful and archaic, accusing the palace of punishing children for their parents' choices. On social media, arguments flared, hashtags trended, and commentary dissected each line of the official statement. Charles, however, continued his characteristic silence, abstaining from any supplemental remarks or interviews. Instead, he immersed himself in royal responsibilities, meeting with Parliament, attending Commonwealth functions, and maintaining a discreet distance reminiscent of the Queen's approach. Privately, close confidants of Charles recognized the toll on him. One friend recalled how this situation touched on the essence of his identity, as both a monarch and a father, and as someone still processing the loss of his mother. The responsibility of honoring her final wishes while knowing it would reshape his bond with Harry weighed heavily. He characterized it as a burden that doesn't lessen with time. Yet in his sadness, Charles located fresh resolve. He perceived the monarchy at a turning point. For years, it had straddled tradition and the push for modern relevance. To remain viable, Charles felt it needed a precise direction, one the Queen had signaled in her will. By adhering to her stipulations, he embraced principle over convenience. Though he knew the move wouldn't be universally applauded, he hoped history would ultimately recognize its value. In subsequent weeks, King Charles refocused on his public role. He engaged in high-level conversations with international figures, greenlit new royal projects around climate change and mental health, and visited overlooked regions under the Crown's umbrella. His drive to redefine the monarchy in a rapidly evolving world grew stronger, guided by the unspoken truth that sometimes, even within the confines of family, duty must prevail over easy accord.